this concept of a week-to-week check-in and family meeting, and we'll linger a little bit more on that. This real big idea, we were even just chatting, the three of us beforehand, and this is probably the biggest thing. There's just, I put the sorry apostrophe. There's lots of uncertainty. And what does that really mean? Our kids' worlds have shrunk. And so again, what does that practically mean, especially since it seems like it's going to be a little smaller for the next probably 6 to 12 months versus where our kids were a year ago. And then working with behaviors as a family that probably everyone, adults and children, have developed some maybe wonky behaviors as a result of everything going on. And how do we look at that as a family? And then one of the biggest things is, I think the majority of us have become a lot more sedentary. And so why is that important that we're talking about that? And then how can we sort of problem solve that? Just sort of looking at these big pictures. Anne-Marie, is there anything you want to sort of add as just these general ideas?
Yeah, and the thing that we will keep in mind and we'll try to talk about to respond to the wider group here is at different ages and developmental levels, each of these have different meanings for the children and also for the way that you parent a 5-year-old versus a 15 or even the young adults, 25-year-olds who are home. So we'll keep that in mind and try to address as much as we can for you.
Perfect. Yeah, so sorry. I don't know if this cute. So this realignment and family meeting, this is something that I've been really sharing with a lot of the families that I'm working with. Is it seems like there is rapid fire change week to week, maybe even less than a week. And one of the things that I've really been advocating is going back to sort of those once a week family meetings where you get together and you just talk things out, sort of take the temperature of everybody, figure out what's on everybody's agenda. And sometimes it's a little different for kids. Sometimes it's different for the different parents, and maybe parents want to like have their own family meeting before they involve the kids in. And so we just sort of sketched out, if you're saying, well, I've never done a family meeting, like what would be on this family meeting? How would I go about it? Some things to just consider. It can even be over playing a card game or a board game or make your own sundaes and ice cream. It doesn't have to feel like a board meeting. It can feel almost more like a family get together. And I would actually maybe encourage that, is doing some kind of activity, but then having a discussion like this. And if you are doing it week to week, starting to have it feel a little bit more routine. So there's some predictability for the kids. You could even write out an agenda or collaborate. But a quick just weekly check-in. How is everybody's week this week? What's been one good thing this week? What's been one not so good thing this week? Just so everybody gets a chance to sort of talk about their highlights and something that's really hard. Just saying, what is on everyone's agenda? Is there anything that as we're getting together as a family that's been on your mind and you want to make sure we're talking about? What are any big changes or decisions? So are there things that you guys as a family are considering that is different than how you've been doing it? And then sort of based on that, what do we already know? And what do we still need to find out? Whether it be kids getting together with their friends or signing up for a virtual class or something bigger going on. And then what are we in agreement on as a family? What are we seeing differently? And just sort of, again, rather than this all being sort of swept under the rug or the elephants in the room, talking about these things and acknowledging that maybe not every family member seems eye to eye. And then are there any action steps and just even some specific things? Are there daily living responsibilities? Like, are there chores around the house or other things? Are there COVID related decisions? Anything that's occupational, going back to the office, how do kids feel about that with parents going back to the office? How do adults feel about that and sharing that? Anything academic going on, like getting ready or finding things out about school or summer camp? and just anything social in their circle. Like even if somebody's just been fighting with a friend, or they used to have a virtual sleepover and now that person's going away to sleepaway camp in another state, and any just sort of big emotional stuff that's on people's minds. So to encourage, this might be a nice entry point for people as we're navigating all these traditions, is to start including in this new ritual. And Anne-Marie, do you have thoughts about how these could be modified for different ages?
Well, and I think that's actually relates to something that's so important. With having a family gathering like this to set an agenda for the week or hear from one another, it's so important. What is going to get us all through this era for however long it lasts, because we are uncertain about that, is trying to be flexible of mind. As much as we want some structure and you want routine so that things are as predictable within your own world as much as it can be, and the kids need that, at the same time, we have to be able to be a bit flexible and teach that to our kids. So your teenager, let's say, gets a virtual online externship for the summer, but then it gets canceled because that business isn't opening. What you want to do is learn and teach them how to be, okay, what's the plan B? What's the plan C? You know, definitely validate their feelings about it, and we'll talk more about that. But teaching them how to be flexible, and you two being flexible within reason, is important for any of these kinds of, you know, let's set our week going forward, and let's look back to what last week was like, what worked, what didn't, and how we can move forward.
Yeah. So even adding another square here, like what do we need to be flexible about, or how were we flexible, and bragging about it to even sort of reinforce that idea. Great. Yeah. Good. So one of the things that when we were looking at questions that came up were these big questions about anxiety. How do we deal with our own children's anxiety? And I put in up here anger and oppositionality too. And the reason why that I bring that up is because often when children present as angry or do these sort of big behaviors, or you're getting a lot of no's, it can often be a manifestation of anxiety, that it feels like anger, it feels like oppositionality, and we as parents want to pull our hair out. But sometimes when we get to the root of it, there's a lot of worry, and there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of fear that's sort of driving it. And these are the types of the anger behaviors and the oppositionality usually get a kid out of the situation that's making them feel anxious. So that's why we put that up there, just for something to think about. I think just a couple of maybe like thoughts and tools, it's not all on here, so we'll chime in more, is this idea of that anxiety can be somatic in kids. So what does somatic mean? Somatic means like body manifestations, a lot of headaches, a lot of stomach aches, feeling tired. And it can be confusing in this age of COVID when we are sort of hypervigilant to like, what's wrong? Are you sick? And things like that. So one, just recognizing if your kid is complaining about a lot of bodily things, it doesn't necessarily mean that maybe medically something's going on. This could be a way that they're flagging to you that they're feeling anxious. And how can you stay as calm and non-reactive and not automatically think something's wrong with my child, but also just still sort of vet it out in a certain way.
Yeah, and if we could say, I mean, something that's very important, I've spent as, well, we should probably say this. I'm a psychologist, as Rebecca said, and I've spent my career in the area of the anxiety disorders, working with children and teenagers with anxiety and also depression, but primarily anxiety. And I was an anxious kid myself. But the thing to know is it is the time for anxiety. If your brain is working the way it should, and what has been inborn to us, alarms that we have in a certain region of our brain, alerts us to danger, helps us to keep safe. Well, there's COVID, and COVID is something that can be pretty traumatic. So it's normal for all of us to be experiencing anxiety. And the thing, though, we want to do is make sure that by paying attention to the CDC and what they're telling us, and to, you know, and knowing, washing your hands, wearing masks and so forth, and finding out ahead of time what will the work environment be for me? What will my child's school environment be for them? If we get together with another family, are they also wearing masks? Will they stay distant? Knowing those things gives us a sense of control and helps calm the anxiety a bit, because you're doing what you can. But we should expect kids are going to be more anxious for a while. They'll resonate with your anxiety. If you keep your cool and follow these guidelines and stay up with what is the real news on what's going on out there, you should be fine too. And your kids will be much better and deal with it much better. But as Rebecca's saying, watch for physical manifestations, because that tells you if they're not sleeping well, if they don't concentrate well, if they get more clingy with you, where are you going? Are you going to be okay? Or don't leave, things like that. Then you know that their anxiety is getting heightened. And also if they're worrying, if you're getting tons of what if, but what if school won't ever start again? But what if I'm not going to keep up when I get back? These are the things that you want to look for to see if anxiety is starting to get a bit out of control.
Yeah. And that was one of the questions that I think we saw a lot is, when do I know, is this just normal worry? And when should maybe we be seeking out professional help? I think some of these flags that you just mentioned really are sort of a nice checklist to keep in mind. And I would say anything that starts going over a week to 2 weeks with a behavioral change is a week to 2 weeks. Is sometimes we need that cushion time and transition time to process out a worry or a change. But if you start to see these things, the sleep changes, the clinginess changes, the what if changes that are really persisting beyond a week or 2 weeks, this is when we start to say, okay, maybe we do want to get some more support outside of our family.
Right. And the other thing too is, if you are finding that no matter how much you try to tell your child and reassure your child and prepare your child, but they just can't seem to get it and they continually come back with more what ifs, okay, then a little bit of help will go a long way for them and for you.
Yeah. Because anxiety is often called sort of like the doubting disease, that God himself could come down and say, Bobby, Maria, I'm God, I'm all knowing, everything's going to be fine. And if your child's going to turn to God and say are you sure? There's a lot going on in the world. Maybe you don't know. And there's no reassurance that'll satisfy your kid. Yeah, exactly. We've gone a little bit more into anxiety land. A couple things just that we thought might be like easy tricks for parents to incorporate is this idea of worry time. So setting some time aside, 5 to 10 minutes every day at the end of the day at a place where your kids normally do homework, like the dining room table or a desk, and just sitting down and being able to sort of write out their worries. Sometimes we find when it's all in here, we're carrying it. And if we can just like get it down on a piece of paper, it seems really sort of hokey, but sometimes it can make a difference if we start to create that as a routine, just to put it out there. And one of the things is sometimes kids seeing they're putting the same thing down every day and they realize like, oh, okay, like maybe I don't need to be holding on to it more. It's really just the same worry. The other thing that I like to talk about is this idea of probability versus possibility, and really us understanding this as parents. And then if we can in some way having our children understand that yes, it is possible that mom and dad can get sick with COVID, but let's really look at the probability or the likelihood of it. Are we wearing masks? Yes. Are we still socially distancing? Yes. Are we minimizing the places that we go? And when we do go, we even see like from this checklist that they're pretty low risk. Yes. So we know that it's still possible, but the probability or the likelihood is fairly low. And teaching your kids to start to think that way with all of these changes can sometimes be helpful with anxiety. The other just idea is our mind can play tricks on us, and you can't really see, but there's this sort of optical illusion of the two arrows. And we often ask like, which arrow's longer? And our mind plays a trick on us, because even if you've seen this optical illusion before, your brain still automatically wants to say that that bottom line is longer, even though we know the two lines in the middle of those arrows are the same. And we know just when we intellectually know something, our brain isn't always logical. And the same thing is sort of about anxiety, is that we can have feelings where things just feel off, or our brain sort of wants to lead us in a certain direction. And this idea, if we can hone in for ourselves, that sometimes a feeling is just a feeling and it's not the truth, and that we don't have to get wrapped up into that anxiety feeling. We can just keep on going with our day. And then it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel mad. It's okay to feel bad. That feelings are actually normal and natural. And like Anne-Marie was saying, of course, in a time of COVID, it would make sense to feel sad, mad, bad in these days and times. Yeah. So sort of.
Yeah, they're missing their friends. They're missing various things that are supposed to go on for them. So we need to validate their feelings and let them know that it's okay to feel. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be mad. And then let's turn it into something then that you can do. How can we do some things to honor some of the stuff that you're upset about and you can't have at the moment? And plan ahead, and also do some things that bring you some good feelings now.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
The other thing, just a couple other quick tools that I think we wanted to just share if you're really seeing your kids struggle, is just paying attention to the moment. You can do box breathing, where you're breathing in and really just paying attention to your breath. You can ask your kid to squeeze ice cubes, or, you can even, if you have a bathtub because you don't have a pool in the backyard, because you don't have a backyard because we live in the city, you can put some cold water in and some bubbles, and just like even feeling that and noticing what does that feel like. And we also know that tends to like calm someone down when they're really, really feeling upset. We can even just pay attention if a kid is really getting panicky and you don't know how to bring them out of the panic, is trying to get them to pay attention to anything. And it could be, let's look at the shapes in the room. Let's look at the colors. Let's look at the Mickey Mouse characters or things like that. Obviously you don't want to do that with a 15-year-old. They might not like paying attention to Mickey Mouse characters, but just getting them sort of still in the moment, but out of whatever they're panicking about. And what Anne-Marie was saying, how do we stay as parents non-reactive and calm, that kids are really going to read us? So I don't know, Anne-Marie, if you want to share any tricks about that, since you were talking about that a little earlier, how important it is for us to sort of manage our own emotions.
Well, people have used this before, and you might think it's like, you've heard this. But think about when you get on an airplane with your kids and they're going through the safety check, the first thing they tell you is, if that mask falls down from overhead, you have to put it on your face first, and then you adjust and put it on your child. And this is the way we actually need to deal with anxiety too. We need to find time as parents to set ourselves a time and space where we could be alone. It might not be till midnight, but where you can be alone. You can do your own deep diaphragmatic breathing. You can take the time in your mind to look through, what are the things that I'm worried about? How realistic are they? What can I do to manage those? And things that I can put into place. But then to do a lot of soothing for yourself. And this is take your own hot bath, or give yourself a facial, go for a run, various things like that. We have to take care of ourselves first. That then allows us, at those moments when your child comes running in and they're upset, that allows you to find a calm space and listen and breathe while you're listening to what they are upset about, and validate what's going on with them. I hear that. That's upsetting. We'll talk about more of this in a little bit. But then it allows you to be a better problem solver with your child, to engage them in what to do to cope with the situation.
Yeah. And just some of the other things to just think about, like sort of like tweaking our own thought process, and then being able to even like talk out loud. So we're showing our kids these helpful thought process as well, is when we're thinking out something, or we've actually already thought it out, but we want to sort of illustrate how we thought it out to make it for a kid, is this idea of not thinking in terms of I should do this or he should do that, sort of banning the shoulds and the musts, but reminding ourselves we don't have to like it. This isn't what we chose, but at the end of the day, we can handle this. So not there should have been camp and this is unfair, but I don't like that there's no camp and that they just canceled it and changed it on me, but I can handle it. And when this happens to us, sort of talking it out loud, but also being able to sort of, when our kids are saying there should have been camp, I'm so upset, then saying, I hear you, and give that empathy and that validation, of course, but maybe just without pointing out, you should be thinking this way, because that's another should, saying, I hear you, I know you don't like that camp got canceled. I think, however, as a family, we can handle this. We can figure it out. It doesn't have to be like you're purposely telling that kid to change their thinking, but you can
Right.
parrot it back in a slightly different way. And this idea of radical acceptance, I don't know about you, Anne Marie. This has been the one thing that has been particularly helpful for me with every change and every transition and every decision that I've been making, is this idea of just accepting whatever is being slung at me. Like knowing that I'm going through a historical moment. I never, if you had asked me a year ago, hey, would you like to go through something that's probably going to be in the history books? Do you want that for you and your child? I might say, no, unless it's me winning the lottery. No, I don't want that. But saying, okay, but here's where we are. Here's my moment. And either I can keep on wishing I could control this moment, which is futile, or I can just try to say is, I radically accept this is my reality. This is my moment. And I have firm faith that I'm going to figure out a way to get through it with my problem solving, like resources, with my decision making, with, you know, getting help from other people. So
yeah, and this is so critical for us to focus on what we can control, right? And we can't control the time horizon on this. You know, this is up to science and other factors, but we can control how we take care of ourselves and help our kids take care of themselves for however long that lasts. We can't control things other people do, but we can control what we do, and then also who we choose to associate with, you know, who are more safe. So radical acceptance also involves recognizing what you can and cannot control, and letting go of trying to over control things to make it all better, because it just makes you spin out of control then.
Yeah, great. So there were a lot of questions also about resilience. And I thought there's so many different ways that you can think about resilience, but here are some really just core ideas on what you can be doing for yourself as parents, what you can be just doing for yourself as individuals, but also what you can be doing it for your family to make your family more resilient, and also trying to be thinking about what you want to make sure to incorporate in your child's life to help make them more resilient. And this idea,
yeah, but let me just say something, actually, because we have talked about this, you and I and others, in the past. And before we get into this, but we have to understand something, that the term resilience is thrown around in a way that makes people think after a stressful period or a trauma or whatever, the person is kind of like a rubber band and should just snap back to who they are. And this again comes to the acceptance that things are going to be changed. We are changed. Your kids are changed and their experiences changed and such. And so resilience means looking through these boxes that we'll talk through and allowing yourself and helping your child to allow themselves to accept what's changed, to own and deal with the things that have come out that will be good for them, or that, you know, you've had more family time, let's say, whatever, find those things, but also to learn from those things that you have to let go of or that you're missing, and to move forward with that. So resilience is coming out of something, having used coping skills and taking what you can and managing, mourning where you need to mourn for those who have lost people, and adjusting. Resilience is using coping to move forward over time and be able to move beyond this.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to go through every single box that people are seeing them. Is there a box that you think that is really, really important, or that you want to just elaborate a bit more on?
Let's see. What about taking decisive actions
Yeah.
that
Okay.
help you to face your challenges? That's something that is actually, we're getting a lot of questions at our clinic about this because we're getting calls from parents. Well, this camp is open. Should I send my child? I don't know what it's going to be like. What am I supposed to do when I go back to work? Because that means, you know, my mother or my mother-in-law has to come in, and do I trust them? There's all these kinds of things. You have to take some decisive actions
Yes.
at times, based on whatever your circumstances are and your needs are for you and your family. And to do that means you're going to be facing these challenges, but get help and support. Lean on a friend, problem solve it with a relative or somebody you trust to make, you know, and think through what are the possible angles, and then make the decision. And the thing is, let's own our decisions. And if it turns out not to be the right one in some way, you know, then you'll make another decision as you move on. But we
Yeah.
have to allow ourselves to do that.
Yeah. And that's where, in some ways, these boxes are linked. Because even if you make a decision and a decisive one about what you're going to do for the summer, and then you sort of look back and say, huh, I might have made that decision a little differently. Well, that's actually an opportunity for self-discovery, like the next box
Right.
over, saying like, well, what originally led me to that decision, and why do I not particularly like the decision? I was going to say, sort of link with the decisive action, I think, is moving towards realistic goals. The world has really been flipped upside down in so many ways, like goals for our kids that they were having, thinking about like bar and bat mitzvahs that were maybe set for this upcoming year, and seeing that that might change a little bit. Also just thinking about our own professional goals and what we were considering. I would even think about like financial goals and how all those things, and in some ways accepting that those goals might not be particularly met, but then saying like, what are my new goals, or what are my short-term goals, and just emphasizing that they're realistic and what's one step that I can take right now to move towards that goal. When there are so many decisions to be made, that can feel a little overwhelming, is sometimes focusing on one thing that you can do. So,
Right. Good.
okay. Yes, and this is, I just thought, a nice visual.
Very
Okay.
good. Yep.
So just, yeah, without getting too much into it, thinking about also, again, how can you sort of nurture yourself? How can you work with your kids? And I think this is also really nice for middle school and high school kids. There's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And Russ Harris is an author who writes a lot of self-help books on acceptance and commitment therapy. And so he, at the beginning of all this, put together a really nice PDF where he talks about face COVID and sort of walks through a lot of things that people can do. So I don't want to like steal Russ Harris's thunder. And also, I don't think we have enough time to go over these steps, but I did just want to mention this as a nice resource tool for people to use at home, that it can be applied for definitely COVID related decisions, and figuring out like, when I am making a decision, how can I manage my own emotions, feel decisive about things, and then reflect on afterwards and gather the information. So yeah. I think we were just thinking, yeah.
Here, this is, you know, and in all the years that I've been working in the area of anxiety, two things come to mind, whether someone is 5 or 55. One is an inability to really soothe oneself. And you see it in your children sometimes when, you know, they need you to soothe them, they can't soothe themselves. We see this in individuals who struggle with anxiety all the way through life. They have a tough time calming themselves. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, when anxiety is really heightened, you may be fight or flight. You're working basically from the amygdala of your brain, which is reptilian. It's not your cortex. So you're not thinking through the steps of, how do I handle what this problem is? So if there's anything to do with your kids over time, is to help them learn problem solving. how in the moment, and you could play a game even with, let's have a, and this is where social stories come in too, Rebecca,
Yeah.
let's tell the story of a girl or a boy who gets into difficulties. This is what's happened. And you take turns, have the kids taking turns, coming up with solutions for managing the problem, and then deciding which one to go on. If you could teach your kids to problem solve, that goes so far in helping them to manage as they move along. And it's also so good for us to think through the what ifs, but also to have a solution then to manage it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just exactly. Yeah. And I was going to say, you can have fun with this. I think we just wanted to show these are the elements of problem solving. So whether you're considering, do I pod with another family? Do I send my kid to summer camp? Do I end up subletting my place? These are all big decisions, and there's really no right or wrong answer. So I think one of the things is, how do we help you navigate? Well, there's probably a billion answers that are right for a billion people watching this. I don't know if we're going to get a billion people watching it, but
that would be huge.
I know, that would be interesting. But what we can say is take this skill, really say is, what's my problem? What am I trying to figure out? And at the end of the day, what's my goal? What do I really want to know? Or what do I want to figure out? I would say include all options. And the reason why we stick in include do nothing, because that's sometimes what a lot of people are currently exercising, when they're not sitting down and they're not doing the problem solving, they're not really figuring it out. Just by sort of default, they're doing nothing, which often has a lot of negative consequences. I like to say, start with all the pros first. People can often really figure out what's wrong with the solution. But if you force yourself for every solution to figure out what are the pros, then you'll very easily get to the cons and evaluate. Sometimes you want to combine choices. Sometimes maybe you do pod with a family and do go to summer camp, but you figure out what that means. Reevaluating if necessary, and then really trying your hardest to make a decision and actually try it. This is, I think, what you were saying with the decisive action. Problem solving is only so good if you're actually trying to implement the solution, and giving yourself permission to say, maybe that wasn't the perfect solution. And that's where this is evaluate and modify if necessary. Just because you're down one track doesn't mean you can't evaluate and modify. So, yeah. Yeah. And you can also be teaching this skill in so many different ways. Like, what are we having for dinner? Or like, let's look in our pantry. Our problem is we don't have dessert. Well, our goal is figure out what we're having for dessert. And then you can look in your pantry. And these are funny ways that you can do it that sort of make it easier than when you do have a big decision as a family on how to figure things out, and when people don't always see eye to eye. Another way, just again, for families, if you're trying to figure out, what do I do? Because again, so many rapid fire decisions, so many things that we're trying to figure out, so many things that maybe there's no perfect answer. I like the payoff matrix, thinking about what are the advantages of like taking this decisive action or doing something a little differently. And then what are the disadvantages or costs? But then also, what are the advantages and disadvantages if I just maintain status quo? Because often there's the devil. I'd rather be with the devil I know than the devil I don't know. But that's not always the best advice for our kids and for our family. And so sometimes just being able to see it this way is another way to help problem solve. Yeah, so one of the things when Anne-Marie and I were talking is, and Anne-Marie, maybe you want to speak a little bit more about this, is how important it is to make sure, especially as our kids get older, that we're listening, and validating. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something, when you have children who are younger and they are upset and crying, we oftentimes try to help them to identify what their emotion is, label it with them, and we can comfort them and such. When you're getting more into the middle school and especially into teenagers, a lot of times what you may be getting is quiet, they're in their room, they don't talk to me until there's something that happens, and then they are in meltdown mode. And so what we need to do in those moments is try to reflect to them what you're seeing or hearing, so that they then can say, no, you don't understand, or you don't get it, I haven't seen my friends, and this is supposed to be the best years of my life. And you're able to say, I hear that, this is very hard for you. You wish you were out with your friends, and this is the time you wanted to be with them. Am I understanding that? Reflective listening is trying to make them hear that you understand them, and also for you to clarify and get to an understanding of what is in there for them.
Yeah.
And then, you can work with them on, I get it. I understand. I understand how much this troubles you, upsets you, angers you. Let's talk how you might be able to help yourself, or if it's something that is involved with the family, how we can help one another here.
Yeah.
And this is a big way we get buy-in, especially from our teenagers, is that, one of the things we have to remember is our teenagers, even though they go to high school, let's say they have clubs, they are out of the house a lot, and they have the illusion of more independence than they may actually have. But that's because they're not with you all the time. Now they're under your feet or stuck in their room, now 24/7. And so their perception of independence is gone.
Yeah.
And then if you have college students or older kids who are home, once again, they're under your roof. In their mind, all of their independence is gone. So we have to open up with, let's talk about this, and let's talk about how we can help one another, how I can give you space and independence while we're all living close and together. And then let's think about that. Okay, we can do that. We can let you do that. That's fine. Now, how can we get along better? What I need from you. And if I'm going to let you have a friend socially distance, here at the house, great, a couple times a week. Here's what I need from you. I need you to help with your little sister or brother. I need you to do the chore that we're asking you to. So, you're engaging them in cooperating with them, as opposed to them feeling that you're just dictating all the time how they should be.
Yeah, I was going to say, as parents, we usually feel like we go straight to let's talk about, and I'm going to tell you. And unfortunately, that's when they just shut us down as they get older. So almost thinking about, especially at the beginning, when you're first opening up, heavily weight the first two things versus the third, even that really goes against our righting reflex as adults and as parents. And that's the role we typically play as parents, but it shifts as our kids get older. And especially, right, like you said, is with this illusion of independence.
We run a 5-session group for parents of young adults in teaching them this. And I have to say, sessions 1 through 4 is all step 1 and 2. Step 3, we don't get to till session 5 when they're really ready for it.
The only asterisk that I would put on here is, as kids are having sometimes a hard time and they're alone, and then they come out with that meltdown, they sometimes say these really provocative things that can feel really, really scary, like, I don't want to live anymore, I'd rather be dead. And this, of course, is the worst thing for any parent to ever hear out of their child. This is our worst fear, being actualized. But sometimes when you actually, again, get them out of that reptilian brain, out of that amygdala, and more into talking, we find out they really do want to live. This is just the way that they're articulating how much they're suffering and how miserable they are. So I would say, if you can, when you hear that note, sometimes this is really how it's first going to come out of their mouth, and as activated and as scared and we feel, is see if we can take a deep breath and slow down and really, again, concentrate on making sure our kid feels heard and understood. And are we really understanding? Is our kid truly contemplating something more serious? And we do have to take a very different course of action, or this is really just their way of expressing how they're suffering in the moment. So,
right. Good point.
Yeah. I guess, and I'm just looking at the time. We're doing good.
Okay.
This is another communication skill that's sort of like the bookend to reflective listening. And we threw this up here. Yes, in some ways you can use with your kids, and I think that will be useful. But I also think one of the ways that this is going to be particularly useful is as you're navigating working with other families. Because if you are thinking about sort of, backyard summer camps or potting with people or getting together with some of your own best friends and doing backyard barbecues, starting to really figure out, what is my family comfortable with? Never assuming when people say I'm being safe, that safe has the same definition for everybody. And then instead of sort of engaging in a fight or demands, doing something called assertive communication that sends the message, I'm okay. And when I'm asking for it, my feelings should be honored, but I'm going to say it and express it in a way that still says that you're a person that's worthy of respect. And just finding that this is a nice formula to often follow is when I hear when I hear you're not wearing masks anymore because you think it's stupid, I feel concerned because everything I've read is that masks really can make a difference. And it's not just to protect you, it's to protect the people you're around. So I would like for us to talk about if you'd reconsider wearing masks when we get together, because that's really where I am in my comfort level. And I say, again, it has to be a fair request. So it's not, so I'd like you to put on a mask, dummy, and know that there's no alternative. It's I'd really like us to sit down and like, see, can we reconsider what feels comfortable for both of us? And you can play this out in lots of different ways. Yeah. Good. The only other research that we just put up here, and then we can sort of just speak more freely, is when we're talking all about feelings, being able to reflect our kids' feelings, being able to use fact, feeling, fair request, being able to even identify what's going on with us, is sometimes it's hard for us to like come up with our feelings or put a name to feelings. So I often like just having a visual out there to remind us of what some of the feelings are that are out there. Yeah.
And there are great charts you can even order online for your kids that have all the feelings, the different feelings on them, funny faces and various things that are on them, cartoonish looking, that it expresses some of these. But it's helpful, especially for younger children, if you have like a feelings chart, because they can then go and point to what they may be feeling, and it helps them learn how to express themselves.
Yeah.
We use those in therapy all the time, so.
Yeah.
Good.
I took us off screen share. Any big important things that you think that we haven't touched on with navigating? And I'm seeing, we have all of these chat comments. So I actually just realized.
Well, one of the things that I will say that we didn't go over, but I want to put it out there, and I've been prompted to do this by seeing Robin Goodman's name. Robin Goodman is a psychologist, if it's the same Robin Goodman in Manhattan, who works, and we're good friends, I've known her for years, works with children who have suffered losses. And so with complicated grief with kids, and also with parents who have lost children. And I bring this up because one of the things that has been brought to our attention from the time COVID started was that there are people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who have succumbed to COVID. And this is at a time of life that wasn't expected for them. So their young adult or early adult parent or child who are parents of very young children, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, no one was prepared to lose grandma or grandpa or people in the family. So we do have to pay attention to those families and for kids who have lost someone. And when your kids go back to school, they may be going back to school down the line with kids who have lost people. So it's just something that we definitely want to make sure, knowing that everyone grieves differently. Every family has their way. Right now, there's not, there's like limited to what people can do for grieving. It's, when we know people couldn't even be with their loved ones or have funerals, there's many, many resources out there that you should look for if you have suffered a loss, your children have suffered a loss, because we want to take care of the kids and help them to honor the person and, say goodbye in ways that they can, that make, are meaningful to them, and also to let them experience their feelings and help them with those feelings as they move along. So whoever Robin Goodman, if it's our Robin, that just was a visual prompt for me.
Yeah. And I actually see in the chats, Susan's been putting up some really good things, like from Parks parents, like there's a whole section there on dealing with death that people can check out. And also there's a whole section on self-care ideas. So how you were saying, being able to not just problem solve, but soothe ourselves and do that self-care is so critically important. And so there are some good articles on there about it. So I see a question, how to set, oh yes, and this I've seen in a lot of the Facebook mommy groups too, how to set limits for teens around how they can see their friends right now. Mask and social distancing. Can they walk across the bridge? Can they walk on narrow ways? What about popping into stores for food? These are very, very stressful conflicts that having with kids.
Yeah, this is very tough because, you know, this is the time of life when kids, their friends are very important to them and social connections are very important to them. We're seeing a bit of a mix. The kids who are very social, you know, they're having a hard time with this, but the kids who are more introverted or maybe socially anxious, kids who are potentially those who have been bullied by others, or they're in an out group at their school. It may be based on racial, gender, identity, or various issues, LGBTQ. Those kids are, some of them are feeling great relief being out of school and not having to be around other kids. So we have to, though, pay attention to them and know that, you know, for the most part, it's a time that they want to be out. Again, they want to be with their friends. They want to be expressing themselves. I think the big thing here is the question, the conversation about trust. We need to trust you. We need, and this is, you know, we do this for kids when we start sending them out to parties and, you know, at that same age, 15. And, you know, we need to trust you. We need to know that you will text us and SOS if it's a party where things are turned into drugs and this and that, and we'll just come get you and you just make an excuse that we have called you. Same thing now for if it's an unsafe situation, you wind up meeting your friends and they actually aren't using masks and everybody's hooking up or whatever. You know, there's got to be an escape valve. We want to, you know, and so this, every parent has to make this decision on how to do this with their kids based on their level of maturity and how much you can trust them.
Yeah, so almost saying, capitalizing on similar ways that you would think about your child in a non-COVID era with this idea of trust and decisions, you know, giving them the keys to the car, letting them stay out later with a curfew, other things like that. Really figuring out, knowing what you think is your child is actually capable of in terms of maturity level and their relationship and the openness with that safety valve. The other thing is, I would say, is every family is different. So again, starting off with having your kid feel really, really heard and listened to. But if you're a family where someone is immunocompromised, or something else that's going on in your family that really does change your dynamic, and your kid's situation might be, as a family member, very, very different from the rest of their peers, having an honest conversation then as the family, first making sure they feel heard, but then having, without it being sort of a lecture, but really, and this is where, again, that fact, feeling, fair quest, lead a lot with your feelings. We're feeling really, really stuck as parents right now. We're feeling really, really scared because, you know, mom's going through chemo, dad's going through chemo, and we want to try to let you go out, but we also know how serious this is, and leading with that emotions to have your kids maybe resonate a little bit. There may be some times when we do put our feet down or our foot down if we just think our kids aren't understanding it, and there is a serious consideration in the family, and it's not fun, but that's also sort of the parent's job at certain times, is to be the heavy, unfortunately, and not be the friends. It doesn't feel good, and using that like cayenne pepper, I think, in these moments, that we don't want to overly use it, but in the right moments, cayenne pepper really does make the dish. And so sometimes, you know, having to calm down and saying, I'm the parent, end of discussion. There are moments for that.
There's a question about worry time. What is it? So worry time is a behavioral strategy that has some good effectiveness to it if it's used right. Worry time is where you are telling yourself, I am going to give myself, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes in the morning and maybe 10 to 15 minutes in the early evening, not close to bedtime. You want to do it earlier evening, where I'm going to think about my worries. And this is like Rebecca was saying earlier, you could write them all down. With kids, we put them on index cards.
Yep.
And then you set it for 10 or 15 minutes. And then you do deep breathing. Then you've got to do some deep breathing, and then look at each of the worries you wrote, or your child, let's say the child puts a worry on the index card. Now on the flip side, respond with realistic, factual, coping thinking to that worry. Because we don't want people to just worry and, worry. We want to worry, use some skills to calm, and then respond. Yeah. That's how we work with worry time. And if we teach people to do that, and especially kids, then they're able to more quickly, when worries come up, to go, the reality is this, the realistic thought is that, the coping thought, this is how I'm going to handle it. Then it helps them move along and the worries shrink.
Yeah. Yeah. And we could update the PDF to include a link to maybe like a book. The Worry Cure is a good book written for adults, where part of it includes worry time, or another link about that. Yeah.
And if your kid is too oppositional to try any of these great ideas, well, one of the big things, of course, is how much attention they get for their worries. Yes. So this is, again, it's parenting strategies of you staying calm and saying, we'll talk when you're calmed down, and having, I want to be there for you, but when you're ready to hear what I could do, what we could do together to help. But not to give a lot of attention, not to, again, keep trying to convince them. You've got to say, I'm going to do my worry time. When I'm done, we can talk. And that gives them a chance to calm down too. There's also some very good books, Mania Kana, I can send this to you all later, and we can put it on the website. Tony Pugliafico, Joanna Robin, they've got some very good books around managing worry, Tamar Chansky, and such, that could be helpful for you.
Great. Just seeing any other. Susan, I know there are a bunch of other questions. We're at 8:30. Should we stick around for another 5 minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, if people need to leave, they can. And
okay.
Later, we have 30 people now, and I think that's telling me that they're not leaving yet. So
okay.
And thank you all for being here too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
What to do when your kid is angry and talking makes them more angry? I try to leave them alone, but even talking later doesn't go over. Yes. So I would say is they're definitely communicating something with their behavior and letting us know that either right now they don't feel ready to talk about it, or they don't want to talk about it with us. So I would even say, is there any kind of activity that they feel comfortable and that they don't get angry doing with you, just to hang out with you, just to sort of restart that kindling? We don't know, are they angry at us? Or are they just angry and frustrated at the situation? But just sort of knowing that we're there and that we love them and that we're around and we still enjoy spending time with them, even when they're angry and even when they're not themselves. So like, unconditionally, I love you and I'm here and I like hanging out with you, even when you're not my bubbly, bouncy kid, or you're not my, talkative kid, really can go a long way in validating a person's experience and emotions, even when you're not talking about emotions. I think that's a big thing. So they also, when they do feel like they want to talk to you or they're ready, there's a bit more of a chance that they will. You can also always offer saying, it seems like you really don't want to talk to me, and that's fine. Whatever, I'm just here, to help you. Would you like to talk to someone else? Even offering that as a gateway. Any thoughts about that? How you'd answer that differently?
Well, and the other, not differently at all. I mean, everything was right on. Sure. The only other thing I would add, and we hadn't talked about this, is kids need to move. We don't remember well. We don't send our kids to school at 7:30 in the morning and they're sitting in a desk until the bell goes off at 3 and they, come home. They are actually moving a lot, changing classes, they go to lunch, they may have, playground time and so forth. And so being at home is more confined, especially if you're in an apartment building and so forth. So one of the things to do when kids are bottling up and if they're angry or such, we have to figure out ways to let them move. And I tell parents, do the TikTok thing with them. Make a fool of yourself on TikTok. Who cares? I mean, really, if it's jumping jack, families doing dances, what have you. I had other families who have bought these little tiny trampolines that the kids can jump in the living room on, but different ways of getting them to be able to do some action. Family yoga, Simon Says, and doing stuff like that. So by helping kids to express some of that physical pent up tension, that also can help them to open up more and feel more relief. And then the other thing, Rebecca, you and I talked about this, finding times of day when there's fewer people outside, when you can take your kids to run them in the park, play ball with them or shoot baskets or something. That's the other thing to do. If you're anxious, and I notice Prospect Park is loaded. I go to Greenwood Cemetery now to run around, but finding times, we go now earlier in the morning. You could do that with little kids. And then it's like other times at maybe dinner hour when everybody else is eating, have your kids out and do a family jog or something around the park. So you have to be creative in those ways, but they need to expend their energy.
Yeah, we meant to talk more about this, and I think forgot to include a slide, which kept me off of it. Really understanding the importance of moving for both mental health and for physical health. And what we know even from like some of the research that's on SARS and the quarantine there, this idea of how we don't want our kids to fall behind in sort of their motor milestones or movements. So really trying to creatively problem solve ways if they're feeling anxious about going outside, if they're resistant to going outside, still finding some ways to get our kids moving. Another place that's good, by the way, is the parking lot of Whole Foods by the Gowanus Canal. Because I live by 3rd Avenue. So I've done that before where you're just walking by the water and the parking lot at the edge, and they have a nice little path. So if you go at off hours, early morning and in the evening, there's hardly anybody around, and it's actually, I mean, it's a view of the Gowanus, but it's still waterfront, and take what you can get in Brooklyn.
Definitely.
Yes. So definitely trying to prioritize that. And I guess there's sort of a bookend with that about screen time. I always think movement and screen time are somehow linked with each other.
Well, they're doing online yoga classes, kids fitness classes, and things like that you can find online, but it's dosing here. What's the dose that is reasonable for your child to handle before they get irritable or they lock down and they don't want anyone else, to talk to them, and they're getting angry with you. And, I'll kick this to you because you do a lot of work with reinforcement models. For shaping kids' behavior.
I mean, it could go either way when you're figuring it out, but I do think, paying attention to, like, almost collecting a little data, noticing my kid when he's on the screen or she's on the screen in the morning is fine, and then we can able to run out of the house. Or I would actually say probably grandma's rule: first eat your vegetables, then eat your dessert. And so most likely you're going to find, it would be surprising, screen time first and then get them out of the house. Saying is, let's just take a quick walk out of the house and then you can go on the screen. Getting them, or let's just, do a little stretching and then get on the screen. And I do think putting some limits on, and again, having this conversation. If they're older, if they're younger, you don't have to have as much of a conversation. It's more just, okay, it's still my screen. Is recognizing, well, we had virtual school and now virtual school is over and we're going to shift, just like anything. When it's Christmas vacation or winter vacation, we eat a lot more junk food, or we don't have bedtime in the same way. And then we go back to some of our old routine. We're going back to some of our old routine before March, with how we use our screens, and just sort of feeling comfortable that sometimes you can retool that, and that's okay. And saying we're trying to recapture, even while we're still dealing with COVID, we can still go back to some of our old rules in those ways. And this is a good time, actually, when it comes to screens,
to practice what you preach to the kids. So we've talked with a lot of families who in the evening, all the cell phones go to one charging station that's nowhere near anyone's bedrooms, including the parents. And the same thing with, there's going to be certain hours where we're shutting them off, where no computers or parents on their laptops or whatever it is, because it's going to be downtime. So presenting that as we're all in this together, it's not that we're just trying to control you, it's that we all need to shut it down and just spend time with one another.
Yeah.
Or doing other activities.
Sure. And I would say two things. One thing is in some ways it's developmentally appropriate for our kids to do the eye roll, for our kids to do the stinky face when they're sort of in middle school and high school. And it's their way of expressing, I don't like this, or I don't want to do this and I prefer, but they're actually not being oppositional.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of just appropriately expressing it. I would say is when you're sort of dragging your kids out of the house, still feel in your guts or in your conviction that you're doing the right thing, and don't let them ruin your day with the stinky face. Like if you can say is, I still am really enjoying getting out of the house, and you can think that, and my kid could be eye rolling, you know, if there was an award in eye rolling, my kid would win it for sure. That's okay. That's developmentally appropriate. That's what we want your kid to do. It doesn't mean they're miserable. It doesn't mean they're going to be in therapy 20 years from now complaining about it. It just means they're doing their normal, natural thing, and we still want to get that kid out of the house. I know I like seeing some little kids pop up ever so often. Yeah. So that's one thing that I would just say is, don't expect your kid always to have fun, and that's okay. And don't let it bring you down, and you don't have to take it personally. Two other things that if you're able to do city bike, if you're able to get a bike or scooter for your kids, this is another way that you can maybe get a little bit out of your neighborhood. If you can either borrow a car or rent a car and drive out of New York for the day. One is sometimes just a change of scenery, that our brains are actually hardwired for novelty and newness. We actually get a dopamine rush. And this is why screens can often be so addictive, is kids get these dopamine rushes when they're earning points or doing things, and real life is hard to compete. Well, one of the ways that real life can compete a little bit more on sort of the dopamine wavelength is when we do new things. And so it seems a little silly, but sometimes just going from Park Slope to Williamsburg or, can make a big difference, and just feeling like a bit of an adventure that's good for our brains. So, yeah.
Good.
I'm trying to see any one last thing.
Well, I'll pop in here just a second. And I've also asked the idea of finding places to run around. I posted the IKEA parking lot.
Oh, great.
Which is another good place. Somebody said,
yeah.
The parking lot has a big place to run around. But the thing I think we're missing is, that would be nice to touch upon, is how do you know when your kids need more help than just. So I've seen a bunch of those kinds of questions. How do you set limits on physical stuff if my kid is digging his nails into me? And how do you know that some of these underlying, if somebody has underlying issues, that it's just they're acting out? So if you could touch upon, when do we know we need to call you guys?
Yeah.
One thing that I would, one thing that I could start that's a good one is pay attention to yourself as parents. I don't even think that there's a clear and cut checklist, because sometimes it looks different. But one of the ways is sort of, yourself, and yourself. If you're feeling chronically overwhelmed as a parent, if you're feeling chronically frustrated, if you're feeling like you're on the verge of losing your cool more often than not, these are the times where we either say, A, something's really going on with my kid that is escalated, that's really pushing my buttons. B, I'm having a hard time and maybe it's not my kid and I need someone to help me recalibrate, or maybe it's C, maybe it's a little combo and we're going sort of back and forth. I would say that is, we don't need, depending on like whatever's going on with the kid and the age, you don't need a perfect checklist, but you can really know yourself. And if you're starting to feel like you're drowning, that would be the time where I would say is that's when you need the lifeguard. That's when you need the life preserver. That's when you need the floaties or some swim lessons to help us out. Yeah. As parents.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the your children, look for changes in their mood, their level of irritability. If you see these things increasing, there's more meltdowns, there's more withdrawal, they're really not talking to you, and that is a change for them. There's more anxiety and clinging. So if you see a change in behavior, if you see that their personality and their moods are changing, and that's more days than not, for let's say a week to 2 weeks.
Yep.
Definitely if you are seeing that they are scratching themselves, cutting themselves, hurting someone else, you know, you or maybe the siblings, they're fighting with them more and it's getting physical. Okay, you know, that's something that you can't let go for long either. So you want to watch for these things. If also that there's, as we talked about earlier, a lot of somatic headaches, stomach aches, vomiting, that's not about being ill, but it's just so, they get so worked up, they get sick. They're not sleeping, or they're sleeping with you now again all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Anything like that, you definitely want to just give a call. I mean, even for a consultation, for you to talk with someone and get, you know, a sense of, you know, what's happening here. You describe your child in detail, and that person will say, yeah, well, you know, maybe come in, maybe not. And come in nowadays is let's Zoom, because telehealth is where it's at for the most part. That could be an enormous help to you and for the child.
Yeah. I do want to, which is sort of different than with the child, I want to give a plug to New York State's coping circles. It's a free resource. I think it's 5 to 6 weeks, where it's a small group that's facilitated by volunteers like people like us, where just if you're feeling like you're struggling a little bit in terms of that. Yeah.
Good. Great.
Good. Really good questions. Yeah. Good. And what so we can do is we can pop a few more of some of the resources that we know we talked about in the PowerPoint, and then we'll shoot it off as a PDF to Susan so she can include it in with this.
Yeah, happy to do that. And I think the circles is I was looking quickly for a resource, but if you could find that for us.
Yep.
We also have a list of reviewed mental health folks for yourself.
Okay.
For couples, for teens, and kids. So I've put that as well in the chat. Yeah, and with telehealth, it doesn't have to be a 3 or 4 hour excursion.
No.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, if it's okay, Anne-Marie and I might plug 2 organizations, like national organizations that we're a part of, that have Find a Therapist directories that I think we would both feel, ABCT and ADAA. If you look at either of them and they're Find a Therapist, those are 2 good, where they touch upon for child and adult in different conditions across the spectrum. Yeah. AD, Anxiety Depression Association of America, right? Is that what the letters stand for?
abct.org, but for somehow it's not, I'm not able to send it to you. abct.org or adaa.org. D is in depression, ADA.
Yep.
Got it. That's perfect.
Cool. Yeah. Those are 2 good places also. Good.
The only other thing that I will say from my perspective is I've had a hard time cutting myself some slack, because I just feel there's more and more that I need to do, and I've never worked so hard since all of this happened. And so to just remind parents to totally cut yourself more slack.
Yep.
Yes, self-compassion is huge. Yeah, and yes. Yeah.
And so we hope that you both are doing a lot of self-compassion. We thank you so much for your expertise. It's so helpful.
Thank you.
Hear voices telling us that they, you know, this is a crazy time. This is gonna, and it really is gonna be okay. It's a new normal, but it's gonna be okay. So we thank you very much. We will send out a list of resources along with and we've filmed this, so we'll send out a recording as well. And thank you so much. It's been great.
Great.
Our
thank you.
pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Take care.
Rebecca and Anne Marie. Take care.
All right. Good night, all. Bye.
Bye-bye.